Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about Data Center 101. It's important to know, as we're talking about cloud computing and all the other things that we're discussing in these modules, where does all this stuff sit? At the end of the day, there's essentially real estate called data centers, where all these servers and CPUs and memories and everything sits. So if we look at a purpose-built data center today, we'll have everything from CCTV cameras, very expensive biometrics that controls access to those facilities. Typically, you'll have things like a badge scanner, a handprint, sometimes a thumbprint, sometimes iris scans to gain access to those facilities. Those data centers, we like to use purpose-built ones at rapid scale, meaning that's not an office building converted into a data center, but ones that were specifically built to house computing infrastructure. So very, very aggressive cooling, redundant power, redundant network, redundant infrastructure throughout that data center. So, there's different ways to control fire, for example. So you might have a dry pipe, pre-action system, so you're not sprinkling water on servers, as another example, where if you had a server in an office building and you had a fire alarm go off, the last thing you want is water getting on that server. Data centers are oftentimes multi-tenant as well. So you'll have, customer A in this area, customer B over here, customer C over this way. And those could be in individual racks with servers in them, or they could be cages with multiple racks in them. So there's different ways you can procure space and power and cooling inside those data centers as well. It's important to note that there is a third-party company called the Uptime Institute that actually spends quite a bit of time and energy on rating data centers. And you probably heard the old saying, if you've been around technology a while, a data center is a data center is a data center. And these days, that oftentimes is true. However, the Uptime Institute keeps these folks honest. And there's typically 4 different ratings of data centers. So we'll start with Tier 1. Tier 1, probably not where you want to put your most critical infrastructure, but probably also suffice as well as a disaster recovery or a backup location. The key tenets to the measurements of the Tier 1 are how much uptime you would expect from that said facility. So Tier 1 is roughly 99.67% uptime, or the better way to describe it would be the amount of downtime in hours. So roughly this data center can be down 28 hours and still be maintained a Tier 1 status. From there you go over to Tier 2. And Tier 2, obviously you would expect is a little bit more resilient. So maybe there's more UPS infrastructure or more batteries or more power generation protection. From there you go to 99.7%, which is basically 22 hours of downtime. Again, probably not a place you want to put your production infrastructure. Most facilities these days that are multi-tenanted, meaning there's more than one customer in the data center, are in Tier 3 type data centers. And Tier 3 is basically the minimum standard that rapid scale will use for our infrastructure. And that is commonly referred to as an N+1 facility, meaning that, take for example, it takes 25 air conditioners to cool this facility. Well, N+1 means we have 26 minimum available to cool. So at any one piece of mechanical infrastructure could fail, and we can still maintain power and cooling and all the things we need to operate the data center. You can get into the fuel storage as well on site. So typically a Tier 3 facility would have 72 hours of on-site fuel of whatever fuel they use for their generators. Most frequently that would be diesel fuel. Occasionally you'll see Jet A if you're near an airport, maybe propane or other types of fuel. And then finally, the least common and most specialized would be the Tier 4 facilities. There are a handful of those in the United States. Those are what's referred to as 2N+1. Oftentimes the government highly critical data would be stored in those. Maybe super important healthcare companies might choose to go with the Tier 4. They're often way more expensive to procure power and cooling in those facilities. And it's basically 99.995% uptime or you're down to minutes of downtime acceptable at a Tier 4 facility. So hopefully you learned something today about the different levels of security and uptime in a data center. Come back to see us in the next video.